we can create sort of companies now. We can create protocols that will exist forever. They will never stop if you get their incentives right, but you have to get the incentives right. If you don't, they're going to collapse and it's going to be a disaster. But you can create things that will go on forever. This was impossible before Bitcoin because it's not the technical incentives that make Bitcoin work, it's the economic incentives.
I selfishly want to tell you my architecture, like the way my brain's doing right now. And then we're going to hit tokenomics versus surveillance capitalism. And we're going to talk about, yes, whether everything is an L2 of Bitcoin or if Bitcoin is the L2. Like, here's the way my brain is currently thinking about it right now.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is the base currency of the legacy, like meat space, clown world, like regular world as we see today, taco shops, Starbucks, like all that. Bitcoin is becoming like base currency of that world. Bitcoin is also base currency of the metaverse, like of Web3, of DeFi, of all this stuff, which is over here. I'm not just spouting this out of nowhere. Over here, Bitcoin is on the balance sheet of Fortune 500 companies. It's like the hearts and brains of people are saying it every day that they're switching from US dollars to Bitcoin. We can talk about how many people there are of that or whatever, but people are actively thinking about switching to Bitcoin as their personal base money. Fortune 500 companies are doing it. Countries are doing it. So that is happening. And then over here, wrapped Bitcoin, yeah, I do believe represents that, like, and the stats of just the amount of people that hold Bitcoin as at least one of their cryptocurrencies. And then we can go on market cap and we could go on whatever. So I believe that's there. So Bitcoin as base currency, gas tokens or smart contract tokens paired with infrastructure, because there has to be upside for building infrastructure. So the Ethereum gas token like is upside for participating in the ETH infrastructure, Solana, like BNB, all the stuff. So Stacks, Avalanche, like all of them. But the wrapped Bitcoin to me demonstrates that apps, to use an app, there will probably be different pricing. If I'm paying in wrapped Bitcoin, I'll probably get one price. If I'm paying with the gas token itself, I'll probably get one place. If I'm paying with the government or non-government stablecoin, I'll probably get, or I would call it like like fiat. Like if I'm paying with the government approved fiat, or if I'm paying with like the cypherpunk fiat peg or whatever, like that's still, there's gonna be multiple pricing. Like I believe everywhere is gonna have gas station pricing. Like the bar down the street is going to be, instead of having the Discover, MasterCard, Visa, like it's going to be, if you're paying with Bitcoin straight up, it's this price. If you're paying with credit in any other way, it's a higher price. So, and then I believe the apps are going to fuzz away the gas token usage. Like things have a fee for paying, things have a fee. Like it has a fee, but I'll be able to pay it all with the wrapped Bitcoin as my base currency. That's one way that, and then as far as the protocols built on top of the protocols that are replacing companies, right? Because Ethereum is not a company. But I could build a protocol on top of ETH that would make that, in my opinion, I would call it SATS flowing. Like SATS flowing software, I would get paid with WBTC. And how would I fund my company? I would fund my startup with like one of your things was they don't pay dividends. Like one problem that one solution to this, like how to design a great token, is paying them. Like you're subsidizing the software development, you're subsidizing the protocol development. We should pay them. So, but there's no investor-founder relationship. There's no employee-employer relationship. It's the incentives from the beginning. And there's no DocuSign. There's no terms of service in a like traditional legal system sense. It's simply software. And to me, the reason why that architecture is starting to make sense from top to bottom for myself is because we have to eat our own dog food. If I just simply pull out the USD and insert Bitcoin, but every single other part of my life is still writing to like the corrupt legal system, then we haven't finished the job. We haven't finished the job for my kids and like everyone who's out there. So that's why I like want to have this conversation today, like, because that's what fires me up, is that I want to know, like, am I like on the right track with that? Like, so what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And that's how I see things going as well. Potentially with many more currencies. I'm curious, how do you think about this scalability of Bitcoin, like limiting that? When you say paying with Bitcoin, does that include like with Lightning, or do you mean you must mean like with all the L2s and things like that,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
All the L2s. And I this is where I'm like fuzzing and making a leap or whatever. I've already Ethereum is an L2 of Bitcoin. Solana is an L2
Okay.
of Bitcoin. Like
Got it.
Avalanche is an L2 of Bitcoin. Like Coinbase is an L2 of Bitcoin. Like
Mhm.
it's all moving it. Like
Yeah.
my Bitcoin at Coinbase is wrapped Bitcoin. You know what I mean? Like it's all,
Mhm.
so yes, like to me, that's all there. And then it's going to be, and want to know how I arrived at this, dude? The backwards wise, my backward, like Liquid, like taught me what Ethereum was trying to do. Like
Yeah.
if I had used Liquid before I used Lightning, I
Mm.
dude, Liquid is easier to use than Lightning. It is. Liquid feels great to use. It feels super great to use. And I don't really have heartache over the validating ways that it does it or whatever. But there's no consensus behind it and no one wants to use it. So that just is what it is. So I have to say like that is what it is. So now, okay, well, what are you guys trying to do over here? I can gripe and talk about all day about why I don't like ETH wallets and why the dust like bothers me when I move in tokens and all the whatever. Like, all that stuff's fine, but like, it's still like people are still using it and it's still happening. So I don't have the luxury. You know what? In the same way that like you're like the competition for the currency is still outstanding. I am giving myself permission to be like the competition for the L2 is still outstanding. That's the way that
Yeah.
I say it. That's the way that I say it. I take it up a step.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah. So yes, any and all L2s, whether they're approved or not approved at the moment.
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah, I could definitely see things going that way. I think, like, so I might have mentioned this, but I was in the big blocker camp circa 2017. And I really wanted to see Bitcoin scale on L1. Um, and so that's where all of the current uses of currency comes in. That's all of that kind of stuff. And there's still, I would say, jumping back to what we were talking about earlier, there's still definitely a role for holders like hodlers. They're still in a sense contributing to Bitcoin's value. They're not using Bitcoin in the sense of increasing its demand. They're not buying it to pay for a currency with it, but they are decreasing the supply. So there's something to be said for that. Hodlers, you can rest easy knowing that you're doing your part. In some sense, you could be doing more of your part if you were actually paying for things with Bitcoin,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's on an L2 or on L1 if you can afford it, or
And can I
Lightning,
put my
whatever
spin
it
on that?
is.
It's
Of
not about
course.
spending down your hodl stack. It's not about
Right.
spending down your hodl. It's about you're already paying someone. You're already at the restaurant passing over some form of payment for the food. Your brain, your personal, this is a personal finance podcast. Like you've already decided that food is worth it, worth more than the whatever currency you're giving up for it. All we're saying is switch the payment to Bitcoin. Switch the payment to Bitcoin. Pre-buy the Bitcoin, use Strike. Like I don't care, but like move into that mindset of you're not spending your Bitcoin. You're
Right.
spending money. You're
Right.
spending money for food, and Bitcoin is better money. This whole dichotomy of like, oh, Bitcoin is investing and then this is money or whatever. That is where, yeah, that's tough. But that's tough, dude. That takes so much like retraining because we grew up passing dollars for food, passing dollars for food, passing dollars for food. And so in that sense, that's where I have kind of arrived at like, if people are swapping Ethereum for NFTs, they're not swapping dollars. So they're already reprogramming their brain a little bit. They
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's spend and replace. Like you go buy the Bitcoin back after. It's not like we're advocating spend out of your Bitcoin stash that you're supposed to give to your grandkids. It's like spend the Bitcoin that you have and then buy it with the dollars you have so that the person at the restaurant that you're paying for food can get Bitcoin and not dollars.
with an end game, and because the end game, and you have to decide if you're with this end game or not, but it's replacing fiat money, all of it, like all the way, replacing fiat money all the way. And then all the Bitcoin podcasts that we all listened to for the last 5 years and 7 years and all this stuff about freedom and replacing fiat money and all this stuff, all that's still true. That's all still there. But let's get the show on the road.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, that's
Yeah, keep going. Did you have anything else to say about the block size, the block wars, or what else were you saying about it?
not too much, I don't remember exactly. But no, I
So
think
we're talking about L2s.
I actually do have something.
Go.
I do. So the scary thing that I see, where I was going with this in the block wars idea, is the Bitcoin standard. By its name, it's supposed to say, hey, we had the gold standard, and then we had nothing, and now we have the Bitcoin standard. What I see coming, and what I think has happened since the beginning, and this is my hot take, but I think it is intentionally designed so that the Bitcoin standard goes the way of the gold standard and eventually is rebased, so we have nothing again. And in that way, we're back at square one in 2070, and they're going to do the same thing all over again. And what I want to avoid that, and the way that I see to avoid that is to introduce competition between currencies to make sure that the best currency is the one that we're using, and that at any time we could switch between another current, Bitcoin and Ethereum and whatever currency comes up, so that we never have to deal with the debasing of the money supply ever again.
Mm-hmm. No, super fair, super fair. And because that's like your framework, that's the reason why my architecture that I described can come across as still a little bit hand wavy of the well, Bitcoin has been the standard or has been agreed upon, or the consensus is already in motion that it's there. And where I'm talking about then fuzzing over the gas token and it just being well, Bitcoin is just already, it's just going to pay the gas token. Correct. So, which is why then in our messages with each other, we almost had the reverse take on L2s and L1s. Yeah. So what do you talk about your because when you said okay, let's go for part two and do you want to get into L2s? Yeah, I do. Yeah. What is it?
Definitely, yeah. So I had this realization a little while ago, say a few months. If you map a network topology and you graph all of the blockchains and how they connect with each other, you can't tell which one is an L1 and which one's an L2. There's no way to know. They're the exact same. They just look like a bunch of hubs and spokes, and that's you would have to dig into the security layer to determine which one is an L1, which one's an L2, which one is a bridge. You can't tell bridges, and the original realization was you can't tell a bridge apart from a blockchain, other than that bridges tend to connect to more things, or I guess it depends. It really depends. If you were to draw all of these out, you wouldn't be able to tell which ones are L1s and L2s.
Tell us more about that and tell me what a bridge is. So
yeah. So a bridge, yeah, for probably for a lot of people in Bitcoin ecosystem, a bridge is a piece of software that exists in sort of as an escrow service to between various blockchains. So they can, you can bridge Bitcoin to Ethereum, or Bitcoin to Avalanche, or Ethereum to Avalanche. You can have a software that checks lock times and says after a week that this has been locked up and there have been 1,000 confirmations, so that it's not going to be reversed on the bridge and then reversed on the main blockchain or whatever. It will unescrow those things and allow assets to move from one chain to another.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And why is it important for things, or why do users want things to move from one chain to another?
Yeah. So there are, for whatever reason, there are selling points for different chains. Like different people value different things. You look at the scalability trilemma of scaling, decentralization, and cost. What's the third one? Is it cost? Scaling, decentralization. I wrote on this a while ago. It's been so long since I talked about the scalability trilemma, but yeah, speed. So we'll go with that. So, but there are various properties blockchains that people value differently. So some people really value decentralization. Some people don't, like Solana, or like some people don't value uptime. Like Solana has gone down 8 times this year. They just went down another time the other day, and people don't care. And it could be because the market is a little irrational still. This is a very early technology in the grand scheme of things. But it could be that people just genuinely do not care about having 24/7 access to their databases, where they're keeping their monkey pictures. And that's fine. That's their preference. It's not, one blockchain should not try to cater to all people. I don't think it's, some blockchains cater to specific types of applications, others to different kinds of users. And there's room in the market for all of those things.
Why do you think so? When you're graphing this and it's hard to tell the difference between L1s and L2s, is that bad? Isn't that bad?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's kind of trippy. But if you look at if you take a high level view of like what we're trying to accomplish in this space, it is I think to maximize personal sovereignty. That's how I would say, like, that is the goal of crypto and Bitcoin and all of the things on blockchains that we're trying to do. The unique value propositions of blockchains to me are those, censorship resistant properties, all of the uh, yeah, I would say increasing personal sovereignty and individual liberties.
Right.
So,
Agreed.
and to that end, whatever gets us there is fine in my book. Like
Yep.
I have never really been a maximalist of any flavor. I've had my favorite tokens, and right now I'm in the Ethereum ecosystem mostly working on projects, and that's just because I see Ethereum as a really powerful force for good. Um,
Mhm.
if that changes, I'm happy to switch to, change my focus to other ecosystems. And so, whether things are hosted on Ethereum as the main network, or hosted on Bitcoin as a settlement layer for everything else, or hosted on Avalanche, hosted on Solana, for all I care, if that
Mhm.
maximizes the individual liberty and sovereignty of people in the world, then that's
Mhm.
that's what I want to
The,
work on.
Totally. No, and so to different protocols have different use cases for different things, and different users prefer different things. An edit I want to make to the architecture I laid out as well, where I said that gas station pricing, Bitcoin will receive the most favorable pricing, and then other forms of credit will receive higher pricing. It can very well go the opposite way as well. Whereas if you're paying with Bitcoin, it like if you're paying with Bitcoin, it could be a higher price. But if you're paying with Solana wrapped Bitcoin at a Solana backed startup, at a Solana backed cafe or whatever, you're going to receive the preferential pricing for using the preferential thing. And that could definitely happen. But if you are only holding Bitcoin and the higher assurances or whatever over there, this corporate place could charge you more. But then if you're to just kind of get stereotypical with it, like if you're at like gas station on the outskirts of wherever, and you're on the outskirts and we're like Star Wars, and we're like, no, sorry, we need real money out here. Like we don't take public credits out here. Like we need like there's going to be places that give you preferential treatment with their public credits, and then there's going to be places that give you preferential treatment with the Bitcoin. And so that's where, into your statement of like it's hard to understand the L1s and the L2s, I'm kind of getting to the point of like I tweeted out a funny hot take from my perspective is like if your L1 has a founder that's going on podcasts, like you're not an L1, you're an L2. Like that's the funny way I would say it. That's a funny, and because so I'm okay but this is going down the path, right? Of I understand I gave the bull case for why tokens are necessary, and I gave the case for why tokens are necessary. I'm down with protocols replacing companies, and we will go over your tokenomics versus surveillance capitalism. And then I'm down for people liking Ethereum infrastructure, for people liking Solana infrastructure, for people liking Avalanche infrastructure. And I understand that in the future, different types of businesses are gonna request different types of payments. I would be like, it would be, to me, it's like Bitcoin is, have the euro dollar. The euro dollar is the reserve currency of the world. The dollar as like a thing
Hmm.
is like the dominant thing. Like we know weak currency versus soft currency, but it all comes back to the dollar regardless of where you live. To me, that's where Bitcoin's going. And then it's like whether you're paying with like what kind of Bitcoin you're paying with or what kind of credit you're paying with receives different treatment. Like, and this is where back to the why commerce matters. Commerce matters because producers dictate payment terms.
Hmm.
Costco says you can only pay with MasterCard. If you have a Visa, like you can't, sorry, like go put the cart back. Like they say that. Like they're not like, oh well, yeah, we need the business. Like go ahead and pay their Visa. No, they're like, no, sorry, we take MasterCard.
That's
Like
an interesting
producers,
point.
yeah.
Yeah, because producers dictate terms of payment, and the opportunity that I think we have in crypto is to create the next generation of software and then charge with whatever currency we want to be paid in. So we have a
Yes.
lot of, that adds, yeah, that's going to give that currency purchasing power. And that's what we want.
No, and that's what I loved how you said about like startups all are writing to the US dollar. Like the way that startups and VC capital like currently works right now is that where does money come from? The money comes from either software founders that have already like made it or from Wall Street or from whatever, but it's like want to get all buzzwordy in that world also like the capital formation, like their allegiance like is to one way of doing things in one currency.
Right. They
And
love
over
the dollar.
here, like it truly is like a different bucket of people that see the world in a different way that are rewriting, like, yeah, we're just rewriting the rules and rewriting what it is. And right. So, yeah. So that's why my, like, yeah, L1s versus L2s, to me, I think a lot of that, yeah, is just going to come back to like it'll the way that a normie will say it is like what type of bitcoin are you paying with. That's what, like me and you right now in 2022 talking about L1s and L2s is a normie in 10 years from now is going to be at the small business saying what type of bitcoin are you paying with.
Hmm.
Like that could be an end game of like me and you having the bootleg metaverse conversation right now. Like that's one way that it could play out.
Hmm.
How, yeah.
I can see that.
So yeah, let's talk about your tokenomics versus surveillance capitalism.
So yeah, so something I've been thinking about recently is that tokenomics obviously the way that a token flows in an economy, but it's to me it's more than that, because if someone's coming to me for help with tokenomics, they're asking how do I monetize, and that's kind of it's kind of tangential, but it's important because there are a bunch of different business models in the world right now, and some of those are good for people and some of them aren't because they have externalities. So an example of a bad business model that's been destructive for us is the Web 2 surveillance capitalism, right? There's people are creating these massive platforms, again, going back to protocols, not platforms. People are creating massive platforms like Facebook and even Twitter, Instagram, all of these social media companies that are harvesting user data. And the users are using this for free, but they're paying with their privacy. And who do you imagine are the big consumers of all this data? They're people that you really shouldn't want to have your data, especially as someone who's in crypto, who's running this race, fighting this fight. Um, and so tokenomics to me is an alternative to that. Instead of having to sell your users data, you can create a valuable protocol that monetizes either with a token or by charging people to use it, and then you won't need to sell their data to sustain yourself in the future. And not only that, but the way all of this is going with zero knowledge proofs and privacy by default in crypto, the way I hope it goes, those things, in order to work, they're going to need a different business model. there has to be another way for protocols to monetize than selling user data in the case that that user data isn't available. And if you're still following me, if that isn't there, if that other means, that other method of monetization is not available to users, it won't it the that new way won't emerge. Protocols will continue to monetize with user data if they don't think they can monetize in another way with tokenomics, for example. And so that's where I see the biggest impact that tokenomics make is enabling user privacy and a move away from surveillance capitalism.
No, I love that. And I love that speaks then to why when I asked you, like, do you say Web3 founders or what do you say? And you're like, well, I just say founders. Like, I like that. And I like that shorthand of tokenomics is answering the question of how do I monetize? Because tell me if I'm getting too hung up on this part, though, if I'm trying to bite off more than I can chew. So a founder, right? A founder, a soft, we'll just go with a technical founder that knows what they're doing, like with software, wants to start a company, right? Or start a thing, or has a project, or has a truly, how does it start? It starts with like you thought of an idea in the shower, you whiteboarded it, you like threw up a minimum viable product, or not minimum viable product, you threw up a demo of it, a demo of the key item before anyone ever paid you. You created a demo of a key item on a Saturday morning that's now just sitting on your GitHub page. That's what happens. And then what are your choices? You apply
Basically,
to a grant. Huh?
right. Yeah, you go for it. You got it.
Right. So what are your choices? You apply for a grant at some random place and you just email them your demo. You contact like your friends that have already been in VC and already gone around it and had the exits or whatever, and be like, hey, will you send my demo and my pitch deck? You probably hire your other graphic designer friend to make you the PDF deck, and then you send that instead of just sending a link in an email if you're wanting to really take yourself seriously. And then you like go through that. Okay. But then what happens? When and this is getting before the surveillance capital, before the having to sell the data part, right? Before the having to sell the data part, because once you're in that position of having to sell the data, you already lost the game. Where you lost the game, and this is where I want to ask if I'm biting off more than I can chew. Where you lost the game is when you signed that, like you docu-signed that you received the 50K in return for the equity, and you had to go start an LLC. That's when you lost. Dude. Because your only out is to go Series A, go Series B, and then like if you really crush it, like dump on retail. But now you never put a dent in the world because your HR department had to write to the same clown world as everyone else. Your legal department had to write to the same clown world as everyone else. And you wanted to, like, at the very beginning, if you were already a crypto person, you wanted to start a decentralized thing that was going to change the world. Like, that's where you lost. And so should I take a step back from that and separate that whole like LLC and like what is a company? Like, should I take a step back from that and like just really try to buff up on more of the way that you talk about protocols of just like replacing with tokenomics? Like, can those systems live together? Can well-designed tokenomics that make it so we don't have to sell to surveillance capitalism, can that work together with still cashing the check and starting the LLC? Yeah, go.
Good question. I think for those visionaries that are stuck in the corporate world and tied to the VCs that they've signed on with, I think there is still room for tokenomics. And I think that's because there's an additional selling point. There is additional utility that you can provide to your users by decentralizing, because there's a strong value proposition in having a decentralized protocol instead of your centralized company, which can mine their user data and do whatever other things they want to require to take advantage of users. So if, I would say to a founder that's in that position, build a V2 or build a V3, open source it, but get the tokenomics right so that that protocol will last forever. And there's a concept in crypto that's been floating around, especially the Ethereum ecosystem, called a hyperstructure. So a hyperstructure, if you Google hyperstructures by Jacob.eth, it's he outlines the characteristics of these persistent protocols that operate forever at the cost of gas. And this is essentially, I would define hyperstructures a little differently than he does, but the point is we can create sort of companies now. We can create protocols that will exist forever. They will never stop if you get their incentives right, but you have to get the incentives right. If you don't, they're going to collapse and it's going to be a disaster. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but you can create things that will go on forever. This was impossible before Bitcoin because Bitcoin it's not the technical incentives that make Bitcoin work, it's the economic incentives. And hyperstructures are similar protocols that can be built on top of other protocols that are themselves hyperstructures operating forever because of virtuous cycles of economic incentives. So I would say to those founders that are feeling stuck and tied down to the VCs, you can create decentralized versions of your product and then um, make sure that those are operating forever, that those economic incentives are aligned. And that's the way to go about it for centralized founders.
Mm-hmm. And if you're starting from scratch, like say it from scratch, someone like, what would you say to them?
Yeah, of course. I mean, from scratch is even better. Like, obviously, that's the best case scenario is that you have an idea and you want it to operate not as a traditional software company, but with economic incentives, with participation rewards for users in a way that's not going to be drawing against your personal account as the protocol. You want to have positive sum. You basically want to set up users to play positive sum games or have positive sum
Yeah.
interactions with each other. So you could be facilitating a marketplace, or you could be creating some kind of app that matches a certain type of users with another type of users and creates something that the world hasn't seen before. So an example, MakerDAO with the DAI stablecoin matched up
Mm-hmm.
users' demand for leverage with the demand for stablecoins. And
Yep.
in doing that, created one of the most important DeFi protocols. We have a native stablecoin that's backed by Ethereum, and and it allows us to accrue value to the Ethereum token rather than the US dollar while having
Yep.
something that is stable against the dollar. It's an incredible piece of financial engineering, and has a lot of knock on effects that we like to see in the world.
And are the protocol developers funded? Like
Well, yeah.
continue to,
So
yeah, tell us about it.
yeah, MakerDAO actually did it a really good job. They, there are some issues with it now, and there were some issues with it initially, but overall, founders were able to create something that they got paid for because they had some of the tokens issued to themselves, and you can call that a
Mm-hmm.
pre-mine, but I would call that the right to the fruit of your own labor.
Mm-hmm.
And if people don't want to adopt that, that's fine. Like if someone's keeping 60% of the token supply to themselves, I don't want that token either. So there's a balance there. There's some optimal level of paying yourself as a founder.
To me,
But
that's why to me that's why I'm so comfortable with the whole equity analogies now. Like I don't care.
yeah,
I don't care. It's like, dude, if you are like making something, if a protocol is replacing a centralized company and that's how you're monetizing it, sweet. Like sweet. And then just where then I like, yeah, I just think that's good. I don't that's why I don't like the that's why I can't run as far mentally with the currency analogies. But or just the pre-mine doesn't matter because it's equity. That's what it is.
yeah. I mean, it's only currency. Like these are in the cases that they are currencies, right? They're currencies with specific use cases, and there are a few of those use cases. They're like, not not every protocol should monetize with their own currency. Maybe they should create something that's more like an equity. But in the case that they are creating their own currency, they're at least backing it with their own product. It's not like they're
Yep.
creating it out of nothing. It's that
Yep.
the innovation there is backing the currency itself.
But so keep going. So Maker, how well is MakerDAO going down the path now of like hyperstructure? I guess like how you said, like are they? Is it a protocol that's off to the races, and the people that are contributing to it are being paid? And does it feel like it's like putting a dent in centralized finance?
Yeah,
Probably.
so MakerDAO has a couple. They're at a crossroads right now. They're trying to pivot from being pegged to the dollar to being loosely pegged to an index of Ethereum and the dollar. From what I can tell, that's kind of like the optimal way that they could move. They
Yep.
had a problem where people were redeeming DAI for Ethereum and drawing on the pool,
Oh yeah.
and that was causing the value to, no, I think it was the other way around. I'm going to get this mixed up. But basically, they had some currency instability with their dollar peg, and so they added USDC as collateral because as a collateralized stablecoin, in that model you have to have some of the underlying something that's keeping that dollar peg for people to be able to redeem against it. But MakerDAO, as far as their incentives, they're paying the people who are keeping the peg. They have essentially a decentralized Federal Reserve Board that are paid to keep the price at $1. They have users who are borrowing the stable coins in order to get leverage to sell that stable coin for more Ethereum so they can borrow Ethereum against their Ethereum and have extra exposure. And then the people who are getting the stable coins are getting stable coins. So you have these groups of users that are all incentivized to participate in the MakerDAO protocol. And at a certain point, it'll probably be possible for them to say, okay, this is the MakerDAO protocol. We're shipping it, and we're burning the keys to change it in the future, to issue future iterations, future versions of this protocol. And by the time they do that, I hope and to some extent expect that they will have solved the alignment of all of the incentives in that protocol to the point that they are a hyperstructure, that they are able to sustain themselves permanently, to sustain the protocol permanently. Because the goal of all protocol development in crypto, in my opinion, should be to become something that exists and will never change and is still accruing value over time. So to create a protocol where the developers can just step back, say, hey, this is what we got. This is, Bitcoin's good as it is, and we can just let it go
Yep.
and, let it spin.
Yep. Dude, so perfect. And so what that's highlighting is that there's a difference between like on the scale of decentralization and ossification to like centralization and more like a company as we think about it today. I'm totally like I'm over here. And I'm actually
Mm-hmm.
okay with that. Like I've become okay with that in that, and maybe that's because of this. To me, Bitcoin is that. Like at the quote unquote currency layer,
Mm-hmm.
it is that and heading towards that. Now, when I'm thinking about in my own case, one thing that's a problem is that most of the apps in DeFi all revolve around like stablecoins in some capacity. And I don't love stablecoins. Like I don't have a desire to use them. I don't want to use them. Like I
Mm-hmm.
want to watch Bitcoin replace the dollar, whether it's like tokenized or regular, as we think about it right now. And so it's like, and so then outside of that, it's like token that paid me a dividend in Bitcoin that allowed software to again just replace DocuSign or replace Medium or replace like software as a service. Like I guess I'm more passionate about seeing software as a service replaced than the choke points around software as a service replaced with then Bitcoin like as the freedom money to where that's the way that I would solve that whole thing. That's the way that I'm going to read this hyperstructure, but then that's the way that I would solve all of that is like if at the money layer that's solved and I know that I can peg into or deposit Bitcoin into like the like L2 that cuts corners and is a little too centralized. Like that's how we describe it right now. But that runs all these like new like software as a service things with
Mm-hmm.
better alignment between users and founders and investors and all those things. To me, that's closer or like more likely.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the key is like not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good and having like steps toward decentralization be like the thing, a thing we're okay with, not necessarily a thing we're trying to promote,
Mhm.
but it's at least better than the alternative. Like this is a lot of, talking about. Whenever I talk politics, I'll talk about like I think we could have protocols replacing governments, and we don't
Mhm.
necessarily need
Yep.
governments to exist. And people say, well, then this problem would happen. Then
Yep.
warlords would take over, or whatever, whatever things people talk about. It's like, well, that's what we have now, and this would be a step forward. I know it's not perfect, but it's at least better than the status quo. Um, and so, in the same kind of way, I think having protocols that are using something like Bitcoin as a wrapped asset is at least better than using the dollar. I think everybody in crypto can agree on that.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. No, well said. Like, and that's where I haven't read it, but like Balaji just released his book on the network
Yeah,
state,
the
and
network
like, and
state.
I've,
Right.
yeah. Have you read it?
I flipped through it and I watched
Okay.
his podcast on Bankless, which was fantastic. He
Perfect.
he jumped on with Ryan Sean Adams and David Hoffman.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's
No,
good.
perfect. Because you're right. Like that. That's endgame. Like to me, that's endgame. Like when we
Yeah,
talked about when we had Adon on from Sovereign, we talked about DeFi and just everything. Like we do to me, yeah, to me that's just really inspiring. I've said things on the podcast about like homeowners associations of like you're not supposed to
yeah,
like homeowners associations, but to me, like the if our homeowner association is like could just be like its own network with its own
hundred
protocol of
percent.
how the homes, how the houses work together, how the group of people work together, and then it's like and you are paying for the security and paying for the roads and whatever, and it's like oh well that'll be a super inefficient society. It's like will it like we kind
I
of already
doubt it,
live in
man.
a super
Yeah,
inefficient society. Like, well, won't there be conflict? Won't there be conflict between the different HOAs? Like I, I, I don't think so. Like, actually, like there probably won't be much return on investment to have arguments with the other
right.
HOAs. Like,
Yeah, it's
so
cheaper
and
to be diplomatic.
yes,
I
correct.
always say decentralized WeWorks because
Hmm.
people are familiar with swiping into a WeWork, and there are
Yeah.
WeWorks all around the world that you can swipe into if you're a member of the WeWork. And WeWork
Yes.
owns those buildings, they govern what goes on inside those buildings to a greater degree than even like the police do or the state, the
Yes.
government does.
They do more to keep out, correct.
Yeah,
They do more to control the environment inside there than the government does. You're absolutely correct.
exactly.
And that same analogy of swiping in and swiping out is the same pet like using like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the currency, and then you can swipe in and swipe out among the apps that you're using. So
Mhm.
it's like when like big companies decide to use whatever infrastructure the biz dev from them sold them on,
Mhm.
then like you're like they're gonna want cross compatibility with people pegging in the Bitcoin or like bringing their Bitcoin because like of the network effects of it. And so
Mhm.
and if not like that'll be evidence of like that's definitely an adoption hurdle. Like that's definitely an adoption hurdle of if Bitcoin is not being built in like of that, then like friction's going to continue. Yeah. How so? With a great hour-long episode out like one, and that we're 40 minutes into this one. How would you conclude? Like, what do you want? What to me, this feels very fresh. Do you think it feels fresh, or does it just feel like I'm kind of like catching up? Or do you think that this kind of resurgence of tokenomics and just thinking, are we punching through to new ground, or are we kind of just rehashing things that have been said?
I think it's a little of both, but more on the fresh side. I think these are somewhat new narratives,
Mm-hmm.
and those are important for the
Mm-hmm.
space. Narratives drive markets and market cycles.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as like Bitcoin being the base layer money for other protocols, that's going to be a new narrative for both Bitcoiners and these competing protocols. Ethereum has its own ultrasound money meme right now. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
that's going anywhere. I don't particularly see I mean, it really just, it kind of depends on how Ethereum does relative to Bitcoin in the next couple of years, whether that catches traction. If it does,
Mhm.
there's a whole another host of problems. You get a slippery slope effect with the people trying to be the next Ethereum and that, but point is, I think most of these are fresh, and tokenomics, certainly in the way that I've defined it, is a new narrative. That is,
Mhm.
it's something I haven't seen coming from very many people. There's one other guy in the Bitcoin ecosystem that I've seen, Matty
Yep.
STX on Twitter,
Yep.
is he's on it. He really gets where this is going and where it needs to go. Um, but there's like maybe two or three other people that have this lens of what I call demand side tokenomics to that are moving forward with this, and that is fresh ground. It's a new narrative.
So perfect. And I'm glad you brought up ETH priced in Bitcoin and ultrasound money, because I had meant to bring those up, and it's perfect timing. Like what? So yeah, what do you believe ETH BTC demonstrates as a market force?
I think that the ratio of ETH BTC doesn't mean that much. The they do different things. They're different tokens, and ETH was almost never, for a long time, was not supposed to be a competitor to Bitcoin. It was supposed to be a competitor in what it was doing, but not as a token that was accruing value. And now it's trying to go from uh, tech to money. It's trying to go from software to money. That's a hard leap, but I don't know that it's impossible. It could happen. Um, in that world, what I would hope is that Bitcoin and ETH are like side by side, both stores of value. Um,
Mhm.
because I don't want to see a world where Ethereum flips Bitcoin and then Bitcoin goes to zero. I really don't want that.
Mhm.
That would be probably a bad signal. And the rest, then it would become ETH versus Avalanche, and then it would become
Yep.
Solana, and
Yep.
all the while allowing the CBDC or whatever the next plan is for the world
Yep.
currency to get adoption. And we can't have that. So if it has to be Bitcoin, it has to be Bitcoin. I'm not like, if it has to be Bitcoin on L2 rails, then that's what it is in my book. Um, but yeah, ETH BTC itself, the whole flippening idea, I think, is like, I don't know, it's novel, but that's not particularly a narrative I subscribe to. And that's partly because I don't see that much intrinsic value in Ethereum, and they have a long way to go in creating the demand for that.
Yeah. The ultrasound money, where I can go on both. I think the flippening and ETH BT Ethereum priced in Bitcoin are different things to me. So the
Yeah,
flippening
they are.
of and yeah, the flippening of Ethereum market cap in USD versus Bitcoin market cap in USD, there will be noise around that if it ever
Mhm.
changes, but I don't think, to me, that's random. Like market cap in USD is completely random across the
Right.
board. Doesn't matter what we're talking about, because USD like is a bad measuring stick, blah blah blah, all the way down the
And
thing.
market cap
Like
is a bad metric. I mean, it's not a
right,
company, right? It's like
right,
it's a monetary base, and not all of those coins are liquid in supply. So like Satoshi's
yes,
coins should not be factored into whatever metric we would replace market cap with, for example.
completely. And then the reason why I think Ethereum priced in Bitcoin is interesting now, and I think Avalanche, Solana, Stacks, all of that priced in Bitcoin now, is because if this new narrative and the new architecture that I laid out today of like Bitcoin, and other people have too, that's definitely not like fresh. If the narrative of Bitcoin as base currency of other L2s takes off,
Yeah.
then there is going to be this conversation of, well, which gas token is best? Well, which infrastructure is best? Well, which infrastructure should I invest in? Because, or should I not invest in them? Like, are smart contract platforms worth investing in, priced in Bitcoin? Are, like, that's a great question. That's a question I'm asking myself, because I can have a preference on then which architecture I like to use the best based on UI, UX, and blah blah all that stuff. But then it's the question of, are gas tokens priced in Bitcoin good investments? And then taking it up a step, are altcoins in protocols, if they pay Bitcoin dividends or if they don't pay Bitcoin dividends, good investments, Like
Hmm.
that's because in order to replace companies with protocols, they're going to need capital, and like we are gonna have to pay these people. And so and even more than that, like I want to. Like, I actively want to know if that's happening and support people that are writing software that is doing that in the world. And I would love to be paid in Bitcoin to do that. And so that sounds exciting to me. So, yeah, any other thoughts on just altcoins priced in Bitcoin or gas tokens priced in Bitcoin?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that I think about is if all the altcoins are being priced in Bitcoin, then that's giving Bitcoin even more legitimacy because it's saying we don't care about what the dollar price is, we care about what the Bitcoin price is. And that's a big vote of confidence for Bitcoin, obviously. But the reason I think looking at altcoins priced in Bitcoin like versus each other is kind of a fool's errand is because the supply is so different. Like Ethereum has 120 million right now of the ETH
Mm-hmm.
tokens, right? Avalanche has like a billion or whatever will be circulating at some point in
Mm-hmm.
time. Different there's different denominations essentially. It would be like comparing saying like, oh well, the actually we kind of do this already, but I was going to say the pound and the euro
Mm-hmm.
pricing those relative to the dollar. That makes more no, it only makes sense because of the simple heuristic that we're looking at it with. But if you
For
consider
sure.
how many pounds there were and how many euros
Because it's
there
not
are
talking about the
circulating,
purchasing power. And
right?
it's not talking about the purchase, right? Because then that gets into
Exactly.
what actually is purchasing power.
Exactly. You want to look at, and so that's kind of what I do with fundamental valuations and things. Is like looking at what is the fundamental value, what is the purchasing power of this currency, like what is its
Mm-hmm.
intrinsic value or the
And the
closest thing
only
it can get
reason
to that.
why, because the only reason why we know like whether a salary is like good or bad or whatever is because we know that X amount of dollars is the rent in my area. It's
Right.
not because the numbers of the things or whatever are good. Like
Right.
we already do this with purchasing power, but just inherently. Like we know, like, oh, the rent in my area is this, the food in my area is this, the gas is this, like, and so that's how you then stack up this whole thing. And I can buy that of the fool's errand right now. And so yeah, and it what else or so okay, so to the ultrasound money. Yeah, where's that coming from? Does it have legs? Like is it cheesy? Why is it happening?
Yeah, I think it's Ethereum's like takeover bid of Ethereum of Bitcoin's role. Um, I I think they have two different value propositions, and Bitcoin has a different value proposition than it used to. So when I was in the big blocker camp and early in Bitcoin, when I was excited about getting Bitcoin adoption around the world, I was thinking we need to use this thing as money so that it accrues value. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that has turned into we need to not use this thing. Well, I won't say that. We need to
No, that's
hold
fair.
this thing. We
Yep.
need to hold
Yep.
this thing so
Yep.
that the value doesn't go down or so the price
Yep.
doesn't go down.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and there are some effects there. That helps the value of the currency stay high. Um, it's somewhat. I mean, it locks up supply, and you're at least not selling
Mm-hmm.
on exchanges. But
Mm-hmm.
that's a little different than being used for money. Now, Ethereum is not doing either of those things, but it's kind of it's doing a little of both, but it's not doing either of them well. That's the thing. Ethereum is not supposed to be a store of value, or was not always supposed to be a store of value. It's supposed to be a utility token, a gas token. It's supposed to
Mm-hmm.
pay for network fees. And if the
Mm-hmm.
value of the network fees is not that high, then Ethereum's intrinsic value is not that high. And I think
Mm-hmm.
Ethereum is going to have to try a lot harder than Bitcoin has to become a bona fide store of value because that's not its core competency. It's not a
Yeah.
quick narrative. That's not the one you'd pick off the shelf to just say like, what's
Right.
Ethereum good at? Keeping its number high. No, it's like that's not really what Ethereum is good at, and so it's going to have to work harder to get there. Um, so we'll see. I mean, we'll see if it pulls it off.
No, so perfect. So this is why I think gas token priced in Bitcoin is the next new metric to follow in all this. Because as you were thinking, I connected something that I've never been able to before, and it's that the smart contract platforms, the protocols that make it the easiest to launch successful, well designed protocols that replace companies are going to have the most bid for the gas token. And if those companies are using Bitcoin as their base currency, wrapped or unwrapped, doesn't matter, whatever, like that gas priced in Bitcoin will perform better than other gas priced in Bitcoin with less startups on it. And the reason why, and maybe this, maybe 1v1 of this then is NFTs. Like NFT, there's very little startups right now that have well-designed tokenomics, but there is the NFT like collecting. And so in theory, whichever smart contract architecture has the most amount of NFT like activity, which it would be, in my opinion, would be better if all the NFT like was priced in Bitcoin. But then you would start to see that gas token priced in Bitcoin at least remain flat because it would be pricing in the same because it would be growing at the same rate that Bitcoin currency adoption is. So it's like, and this is why this is a new narrative. Let's wrap on new narrative because I like that word. The reason why this new narrative feels fresh to me in that it's the first time that I've been able to, I feel like, speak to a Bitcoiner and speak to like a gas token like enthusiast at the same time. Like I'm today, literally today is I think the height of me being able to do both of those buckets better than I've ever been able to do both buckets at the same time. And that's why it feels fresh to me. And it's like in the same way that we want to see Bitcoin currency adoption, I also want to see protocol adoption from founders, right? A founder, someone who's willing to put blood, sweat, and tears into the world, put proof of work into the world. They have a choice to build a company or build a protocol. And that goes all the way back to the like Elon and Jack Dorsey tweet right there, where they're like, Twitter can't be a company. Twitter can't be a company. So yeah, dude, thanks for like, this has been really good. It feels fresh to me too.
Yeah, this has been really fun. I'm glad to get to talk about this stuff. Especially, I'm surprised that there have got to be more people like you, but they don't come across my feed. Bitcoiners that are thinking this way. It's just like, from my end, it's been really refreshing to talk about the way forward in crypto with all of these coins and how they can all move together to facilitate personal freedom.
For sure. Absolutely. So yeah, tell us where people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, so best place is Twitter. My handle is at Eat Sleep Crypto. So EAT, not ETH. It's Eat Sleep Crypto. And then that's also my website, eatsleepcrypto.com. DMs are open for anybody that has tokenomics questions. And if you're interested in learning more about tokenomics, check out my website and follow me on Twitter. I'm doing tokenomics spaces every week.
Love it. All right, guys. We'll catch you on the next one.
Hey all, this is Brian. You can reach me on Twitter at Brain Harrington. Shoot me a DM with any feedback from today's episode. This has been a Choice App production. Bitcoin is becoming centric to personal finance, and we want to help you learn how to better engage with Bitcoin financial services. None of this is financial advice and is for education and entertainment.